United States has approved sending F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine from Denmark and the Netherlands to defend against Russian invaders as soon as pilot training is completed, a U.S. official said on Thursday. Ukraine has actively sought the U.S.-made F-16 fighter jets to help it counter Russian air superiority. Washington gave Denmark and the Netherlands official assurances that the United States will expedite approval of transfer requests for F-16s to go to Ukraine when the pilots are trained, the official said. The Ukrainian military is attacking in force in the southern part of the country in search of an operational breakthrough that would shatter Russian defenses. The Kremlin is throwing everything it has against the advancing Ukrainians, including Chechen paramilitary forces. Last week, Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov acknowledged that his Vostok Akhmet battalion is fighting in the Orikhiv sector of the Zaporizhia Oblast. Orikhiv is one of the more heavily contested sectors in the Ukrainian counteroffensive, and both militaries are pouring men and weapons systems into the fight. Kadyrov's comments highlighted the continuing role of one of the premier Chechen units in this key area. Vostok officially comes under the command of the Southern Military District's 42nd Motor Rifle Division, which has been active around the village of Robotyne, British military intelligence assessed in its latest estimate on the war. Chechen forces comprise a relatively small but high-profile component of Russian forces in Ukraine. Kadyrov likely heavily promotes his unit's roles partially to burnish his credentials as a Putin loyalist. Chechen paramilitary forces were among the troops Russian President Vladimir Putin used to quell the Wagner Group mutiny in the middle of June. Kadyrov's power is largely bound up with Putin's survival in the Kremlin, so the Russian leader knows he can rely on the Chechens when the going gets tough. On day 539 of the Russian invasion, the Russian military continued to lose a steady number of troops each day. Further, Russian forces keep losing dozens of artillery pieces per day in the intense long-range fire duel between the two militaries. Over the past 24 hours, the Russian military lost 28 artillery guns, and in the past 5 days, it has lost almost 100 artillery pieces. That is an incredible rate of attrition. It is forcing Moscow to dig deep into its weapon stocks in an attempt to plug new gaps on the battlefield. Due to sanctions and substantial daily attrition, the Russian defense and aerospace industry cannot keep up with losses on the front lines. As a result, Russian troops go to war with antiquated weapon systems that, in some cases, were designed and manufactured more than 60 years ago. With respect to the accuracy of these numbers, which are published every day by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, independent researchers have largely corroborated the number of human and material losses since the start of the war. Moreover, Western intelligence agencies and militaries largely agree with Kyiv's estimates of Russian casualties. The situation in the Donbass region is becoming increasingly dire for the Russian military. Over the past hours, Ukrainian forces have breached Russian defenses around the village of Uruzhain. In their retreat, the Russian units in the area suffered hefty casualties. The Russian forces defending the village of Uruzhain suffered a bloody defeat. Someone in the Russian chain of command evidently believed that the position in Uruzhain was about to be overrun by the advancing Ukrainians and gave the order to evacuate, on foot and in broad daylight, in an area under the cover of Ukrainian artillery. Once the Russian commanders gave the order to retreat, there was panic. Exposed and lacking any protection whatsoever, Russian forces ran back toward deeper lines of defense. But Ukrainian forces were ready. Using tactical unmanned aerial systems for reconnaissance, the Ukrainians had a good picture of what was going on in Uruzhain. Once they saw columns of Russian soldiers fleeing on foot, the Ukrainians called in artillery. Carnage ensued. In a couple of videos published by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, one can see the columns of dismounted Russian troops running away and getting obliterated by artillery fire. Besides conventional rounds, the Ukrainians fired cluster munitions that are designed for exactly these situations. They have a devastating effect on concentrations of troops. The battle shows the lackluster Russian command and control system. Russian forces would probably have enjoyed a better fate if they had stayed put in the village and fought instead of running. the situation doesn't look promising for the Russian forces in the Donbass and in southern Ukraine. The air is saturated with drones, shells, smoke from explosions, a short break at night, and all over again, a Russian soldier with the Vostok Akhmet Battalion wrote on the popular social app Telegram. The Vostok Akhmet Battalion falls under the 42nd Motor Rifle Division of the Southern Military District and has been active in the area around Orikhiv, in the Zaporizhia Oblast, which is about 200 miles from Uruzhain. Since early June, the Ukrainian military has been trying to breach extensive Russian defenses in southern Ukraine and the Donbass and achieve an operational breakthrough. Kyiv's goal is to reach the Sea of Azov and split the Russian forces in Ukraine into two pockets. The northern pocket would include the areas of the Donbass and eastern Ukraine, and the southern pocket would include Kherson and the Crimean Peninsula. If Ukrainian forces manage to achieve an operational breakthrough, Russian forces might collapse and retreat even farther back than the Ukrainians estimate, much like Moscow's forces did last fall when, in just a few days' time, they evacuated hundreds of squares of miles of territory in eastern Ukraine and a panicked retreated. To be sure, the Ukrainian military's progress has been much slower than many analysts in the West anticipated. But slowly and steadily, the Ukrainians are advancing.